let's move on to group chat. This is where we talk about the biggest issues of the week, the biggest story of the week.
The hugest.
The hugest.
The bigliest story.
The bigliest.
Bigliest.
And guys, it's the first week of the Trump's presidency.
No way around it.
There's no way around this being the biggest story of the week.
Yes.
He is getting to work, starting to make decisions about science and tech policy that you may or may not agree with.
Yep.
Among many, many other troubling things.
And I mean, I don't think I'm out of line by speaking for all of us when I say we all disagree with it.
Yeah.
Very much. So I think the interesting thing here is that he's not making a ton of like really serious policy decisions yet. Mostly what he's doing, it seems like, is trying to rein in a lot of these research organizations and stuff.
That's on the science side. We'll talk too about his FCC appointment, which I think does amount to policy decisions.
So why don't we actually start with the FCC
Yeah.
thing, Dana? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, basically his FCC appointee is a known opponent of net neutrality. So basically, to appoint him is tantamount to making policy decisions. Doesn't mean any laws or policies have changed yet, but it's a pretty clear sign of where we're headed.
Yeah, I believe that in December he co-authored a paper for the FCC detailing why he does not believe in net neutrality and why the agency is, in a blanket statement here, going to be going more friendly to companies, and the byproduct of that is that they will be less friendly to consumers in all likelihood, I would say.
And to be clear, too, when he was appointed this week, basically every telecom issued a press release.
We should name this person, by the way.
Yes.
It is. I'm probably going to screw up his name, and I feel really bad, and I apologize for that. But is it Ajit Pai?
Yep.
I believe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I apologize if I'm not. I'm the worst at pronouncing things in general.
He's been at the FCC for a good 4 years already. He was appointed under Obama as a Republican commissioner, to balance things out there. But yeah, he's always been pretty clear.
And every
about
telecom cheered his appointment this week.
Which
says a lot.
To be fair, most telecoms also cheered the appointment of Tom Wheeler.
Yeah.
I mean, he was very much an industry insider. Mm-hmm. He was very much a friend of the telecommunication industry. He worked in the telecommunications industry. He was not like a consumer advocate in a previous life.
And even if he was, they probably would have just sent some sort of milquetoast PR saying, blah, blah, blah.
And Tom Wheeler's legacy in net neutrality is, I think, fair to say mixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think early on he was definitely hesitant to push as hard on net neutrality as, we probably think he should have. And I mean, even by the end, when we got some really like solid rules around like Title II and the regulation of the internet and stuff like that, there's still like a lot of pretty big loopholes.
Lots of gray area, I feel
especially on the wireless end, which is why we have things like
binge on.
Yeah.
Right.
So, it's I don't know. It's sort of a weird thing because I don't want to judge him too harshly because I think Tom Wheeler surprised a lot of us who were paying attention. He surprised me, I know. When he was named, I went, well, there's no chance in hell we're getting net neutrality now. Like, that's just not going to happen. And especially after the first plan came out, and I think it was very underwhelming for a lot of people who were proponents of net neutrality.
But they seem to take the criticism to heart and improve it, I would say.
So now the question is, does the Trump administration and the new FCC chairman take that sort of criticism and the public desire for net neutrality to heart?
I would go with no, because Trump is so clearly pro-business that I think that's just going to be the default position, and anything contrary to that.
That's what I would have said. I don't think he is specifically that strongly anti-net neutrality. I don't think it's a pet issue of his, but I think he is indeed pro-business.
He is pro-business. I mean, Donald Trump has spoken very little about net neutrality in general. What little he has said about net neutrality, I will say, shows that he doesn't understand the issue. And I'm not saying that to be like flippant or dismissive of him. I mean, I'm clearly not a fan of his in general, but this is his statements about net neutrality reflect minimal understanding of the issue. He's compared it to the fairness doctrine, and the two things are in no way related whatsoever. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint where he's at personally on it, if only because while he's been very openly against, he also hasn't really clearly stated why, at least in any sort of reasonable terms. So we kind of have to go on.
Well, what I imagine is that the FCC will just kind of push the rulings forward, and he'll probably just go with them. Because I don't think he's going to care enough to invest any attention in the issue.
Probably not. I get the feeling that what you're looking at is an undoing of net neutrality, just because I think it's the sort of thing where Trump feels like it's an easy point to score with the Republican establishment, who tend to be very pro-business. And this is probably getting a little bit off topic, and so we'll avoid going too far down this rabbit hole. But I think if you look at Trump as a candidate and as a president, he holds a lot of beliefs and is pushing a lot of policies that are kind of anathema to traditional Republican values. And so he kind of has to
slide a few things.
Yeah, he's got to throw a couple of bones their way,
right,
and be like, you don't want net neutrality, that's fine. We don't have to have net neutrality, but I want big infrastructure spending, and stuff like that. And so he's going to kind of figure out ways to wheel and deal.
Yeah. And this seems like an easy card to play.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't care about it. So just, do what'll make him happy.
Any other thoughts on that, Dana?
No, I basically agree. I mean, I'm willing to be surprised,
Yeah.
but expect him to err on the side of fewer regulations.
Yeah.
The good news
Then
is that
more.
I think it'll take some time at the very least. And I think this kind of goes back to what has happened this week. There's been a lot of laying groundwork for stuff to change, but I think not a lot has actually changed, which is at least somewhat heartening, right? Eventually, he can issue all these executive orders and appoint people, but at some point, it's going to get down to dealing with the rest of the government, and that's when things will slow down. And this, I think, changing net neutrality is one of the things that will at least take a little bit of work to, get done.
Yeah. So the other big storyline this week, in his first week, has been this sort of stuff about gag orders put on certain agencies or departments of the agencies, in particular the EPA, the National Park Service, the USDA, but not the entire USDA. It was specifically the Agricultural Research Service, I believe, and certain sub-departments in the Health and Human Services, right? Am I correct on all these things?
I don't know about the last one.
That doesn't ring as familiar.
Hang on, let me double check this.
But the overarching theme seems to definitely be an attack on science-related parts of the government. That's how I would categorize it anyway.
Okay, so
what do you got?
Well, I was going to say, talk a little bit about that. Sort of lay out that argument for me.
Well, so Trump has been very anti-EPA for a while now. He said he wants to do some major reform in the EPA. So he started off the presidency by putting a freeze on grants and contracts. And while that's not totally unprecedented, I think it was a little more of an aggressive move than has been made in the past usually. Every time a new administration comes along, they want to kind of put the brakes on things and figure out what work is being done before they move forward with it. But going along with that has been a gag order on the EPA and the other agencies you mentioned that no press releases, no social media. And that's kind of troubling because these are government agencies that our tax dollars are paying for who are being told not to communicate with the public. So that is a problem. And the fact that it's very specifically science-related, climate change-related is troubling. They're basically saying we don't want you guys putting out this propaganda about climate change being a thing because we want to destroy the environment with our pro-business plans. Basically, I mean, that's what on the Trump's website or on the White House website this week as the transition happened, they removed all the pages relating to climate change, which again, I think people are overstating the impact of that. It's a totally new website. Some things are not making the transition to the new site. But if they cared about climate change, they would have a page about it. They do not. That sends a message. All this stuff is sending messages about what's important in this
And all this
administration.
website stuff, I don't think, in general, by the way, I don't think are accidents. I also don't think it's an accident that the Spanish language option was removed from the website. That was also symbolic and meaningful.
Yes, it's all very much you can look at all these actions happening and say this shows what the priority is, even if it's not necessarily enacting a new policy yet, right? That's how I would categorize it.
So, I mean, I think there is certain stuff about this that is troubling, but I've been thinking a lot about this the last couple of days, and the hopeful part of me, like the optimistic part of me, has like, and yeah. It's
Wait,
really,
there is an optimistic
there
part
is.
of you? Okay.
There has come to the idea that there's two ways of looking at this that suggest that it's not necessarily as malicious as
It might seem.
So one of these ways of looking at it, I think, is part of what you were saying before, is that, like, not everything's going to make the transition. I think this is the first transition of power from president to president in, like, the truly digital age.
That's true.
And it's been very messy on all levels.
Yeah.
They couldn't even get the Twitter account handover for @POTUS right at first.
So I'm going to say, actually, that I'm surprised they got it done as well as they did, to be perfectly honest. The fact that they were able to take everything that was on POTUS and transfer it to a new account, the fact that that worked seamlessly at noon that day, I mean, the fact that the transferring of that content worked was pretty surprising to me. The follower stuff, I can almost see why that was weird. But anyway, I'm just throwing out a word of support for Twitter there. I think they did a decent job.
No, I mean, it wasn't a complete debacle, but it was also not super smooth.
True.
And I think, you're going to see a lot of issues like that. You're going to see these sort of like bits and pieces that aren't working the way they should.
Yeah.
And it's also abundantly clear that Trump and his transition team are not stocked up the way they should be. I'd have to go double check what the number is on this. But if you go, I'm a big fan of the Weeds Vox podcast, which is all about like policy and stuff. And they were talking about.
The name of the podcast is The Weeds.
It's called The Weeds.
Nice.
I suggest people listen to it. It's a very good show. And they kind of get into like the nitty gritty of policy and running the government and stuff. And they were speaking about sort of the way the transition has been handled so far, and basically the number of like presidential appointees that you're supposed to have running in is somewhere around the range. Like there's like
some thousands, right?
Not thousands, but there's hundreds of positions that need to be filled by presidential appointment. And generally, by the time the inauguration comes around, most of those people are named and like ready to go, even if they have to go through confirmation. Like, stuff is laid the groundwork, and the Trump transition team has like less than half of what the other administrations have had coming in.
So they're operating at a deficit.
They're operating at a
deficit
deficit
in manpower, really.
In terms of manpower, and getting a lot of these agencies under control. I think they were not prepared for things like the fact that the government has however many dozens, probably hundreds of Twitter accounts run by all of these people, and sort of getting them in line and getting on message has proven extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Hence
the freeze. Like, we need some time to figure out what the heck we're doing here, so just stop.
Which I think can seem more malicious than it is in reality. I think to a certain extent we are probably projecting a little bit because we obviously don't like him.
And the word is that the EPA freeze will be lifted possibly as soon as Friday, which is when you guys are watching this.
Yeah.
So it could happen today.
So it's kind of a wait and see thing.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say to counter that is I saw the other day, I think it was the Department of Defense Twitter even seemed to be subtweeting Trump.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's...
It was basically tweeting thanks to a Muslim
refugee.
Soldier. Right, which seemed... Excuse me.
Like we said, Woolman is dying. Yeah. We're all dying.
And yes, I mean, just for the viewers at home, yes, I did just get on the floor to pick up a tissue that I dropped. And yes, I'm about to wipe my nose with it, so just give me some slack, okay?
We'll point the camera away from you while that happens.
Yeah.
There's been a whole lot of sort of subtweeting the president from a number of the agencies, including the Department of Defense.
But I don't see a gag on the Department of Defense Twitter account.
I'm going to say, forget about subtweeting. The Badlands National Park just went full on like YOLO and started tweeting out a whole bunch of climate change facts. I think that was on Friday,
and so
Monday.
The claim after that was that it was a former employee who still had access to the accounts, which, how is that possible?
Yeah.
I think it goes to what Terrence was saying about the lack of preparation and transition there.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a lot of this might just be poorly handling the transition.
And so people are getting in their jabs where they can.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm hesitant to say necessarily that this is like the beginning of widespread government censorship. I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but I'm trying to be a little bit less pessimistic.
I
That's,
think
that's generous of you, considering this is the week that the phrase "alternative facts."
I was about to say, I
was
think
coined.
you have a point, except that when we look at the way that the White House has been treating truth, it doesn't paint a good picture. On its own, perhaps we could just say this is poor transitional stuff, but when you take into account the fact that, facts seem to have no place in the administration to a large degree, yeah.
So I want to come back to that.
I bet you do.
Well, we will. I have some things to say about that. I always have things to say. God, I never shut up, do I?
I mean, that's good energy to have.
Yeah. So before we move on to that, though, I
Yeah.
did want to say the other sort of way of looking at this, the other sort of piece of this, and this is going back to what we were talking about earlier, is Donald Trump kind of sees himself as, and this is a slightly more malicious take, and I think this is also probably somewhat true, which is Donald Trump sees himself as like a wheeler and dealer kind of guy, a negotiator kind of guy. And like one really basic negotiation tactic is to like go out and like ask for the world and then roll it back. So it's really easy to just go out there and go, everybody shut up, no communication with the public. And the moment there's an uproar, well, all right, fine, you can talk to the public. And then everybody goes, oh, see, it's not that bad. He let the Agricultural Research Service talk to the public because that's the one of the agencies that mattered.
Yeah. Before we move on from environmental stuff altogether, I think we also need to mention the Keystone and Dakota Access Pipeline executive order.
Yes.
Which is that those are back on the table for construction. And again, the New York Times kind of said that this was, to some extent, a symbolic thing more than a major, something that's going to affect major change. But Obama fought to restrict the Keystone XL pipeline in 2015, and now as soon as Trump is in office, he reverses that. Again, it's broadcasting what his priorities are going to be. Environment low on that list.
By the way, I did have to look up this Department of Defense tweet because I
Did you
can
find
remember
it?
exactly what it was. And it's still there. It has not been deleted, by the way.
Well, to that point, you're not supposed to delete these tweets from government-owned
Right.
accounts because they're supposed to be stored under the Freedom of Information Act.
So for those who don't know, this was sent out pretty much at the exact same time that Donald Trump was signing the executive orders around immigration and cutting back on resettling refugees
That
in
was
the United
yesterday,
States.
right?
Yeah.
Or Wednesday, I should say.
As that was being signed, basically, the Department of Defense sent out a tweet that read, "From refugee to #Marine, U.S. Marine Corps Corporal Ali J. Muhammad takes the fight to the doorstep of those who cast his family out." Like, that is pretty directly a spit in the face of the executive order being signed as this was going
By the
out.
way, if you could use your time machine and go back 20 years to talk to your younger self, how would you explain the sentence, "The government is subtweeting itself"?
Ooh.
I mean, you wouldn't be able to because tweeting did not exist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a weird thing to be watching. I mean, just think about that for a second. The American government is subtweeting.
It's fighting with itself on the internet.
Yeah. It's such a bizarre thing to watch. It's very, very weird. Which, I mean, also, again, makes sense for some of the gag orders. It's like, guys, you got to stop this. Like, everybody's got to
Right.
get on the same page.
Right.
We have to, at least agree on a certain set of, decorum and what we can't, look, again.
We're not going to troll ourselves.
Yeah.
Except,
as much as I clearly have my political differences with, the president, I also think that maybe the Defense Department should not be openly hostile to him on Twitter. Like, that's kind of a bad thing.
There's enough real trouble in the world that we need to deal with, so let's not infight.
Yeah, well, it's not even about infighting. if Donald Trump and his administration are actively trying to suppress information about climate change, if they're trying to suppress data from NASA, leaking that information to journalists is valuable.
Subtweeting is not.
Flippant tweets, while amusing to me as a person, don't necessarily perform that much of a service. Is
Except
sort
to
of
make
my-
people more annoyed.
Yeah, I mean, which is kind of my issue. It's, it, again, I appreciate it. It's nice. I get a chuckle out of it. But is it doing some great good? I don't know about that.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
I do think that the deletion of any of these tweets, though, is really something to pay attention to because not supposed to do that. And the official POTUS account has already removed several tweets only because of typos, so not a big deal in the grand scheme of things.
Slippery
but
slope.
Yeah, exactly. They're just not supposed to do that.
So-
and they're doing it.
So, well, here's the thing, is the rules around that aren't necessarily, these things need to be updated, to be clear, aren't necessarily that you can't delete them.
Okay.
They just need to be archived someplace.
Gotcha.
So if they delete the tweets, so long as a record of that tweet exists someplace that can be provided under like a Freedom of Information Act request, then that's in compliance with the law.
All right. Once again, try explaining this to ourselves 20 years
Yeah.
ago.
But again, this is also why a lot of these rules need to be updated as
Right.
well. So I don't know.
Do we want to talk about the media sort of mess that you're on to refer to, the restrictions under what people can say? I think you said there was one more thing you really wanted to get into, like sink your teeth into it.
God, I don't even remember at this point. My brain is not working today, apparently.
That happened very suddenly.
It really did.
I mean, I guess we've touched upon the main things here.
We
in terms
have.
Of,
I mean, so I remember what we were supposed to talk about, which was the alternative
alternative
facts.
facts.
So I don't want to dig too much into this.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I think there's a whole lot to be said there, and a lot of it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with technology or science. So I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. I understand that we are a technology and science website and try to keep it at least somewhat on topic. But the one thing I will say that makes that phrase and sort of the first week of this administration a little bit troubling is how the concept of alternative facts could be levied against things like scientific research, how that would play at the EPA. And I mean, this
yesterday there was that news about how all the EPA stuff has to go through political review first. And again, I think that's one of those things where it's something that happened under previous administrations, but it's something that's going to be amplified now.
Yeah. So, and I think, and this goes across governmental agencies. It doesn't begin and end with the EPA or NASA or anything like that. There's a lot of ways that sort of thing could be abused. A lot of it's going to have to come down to, I think, maintaining all of that research available to the public. Like, the public needs to have access to the raw data from the EPA or from NASA. And NASA's always been good about making that available. You can actually go through all of NASA's publicly funded research, I believe. It was actually, the story was circulating yesterday again, although the portal is very old for whatever reason. The issue, I think, is going to come from how those facts are interpreted by the administration. And that's
sort of publicly given to the public, like the way that they make these statements.
And I think that's going to be where the biggest problem lies, is in sort of making sure that people understand there is no such thing as alternative facts. There are facts, and then there are lies. And that's kind of the end of the debate.
And if there are alternative facts, where do things like data fit in?
Yeah, like facts and data are the same thing. They are true, no matter how much you don't want to believe them. You
can spin it all you want.
But at the end of the day, the data kind of speaks for itself. And so that's going to be sort of the interesting challenge, I think, for journalists going forward, especially in science, and to a slightly lesser degree in technology, but also there too.
Well, and for the public digesting this stuff,
Yeah.
knowing where they should be. Well, the fact that it sounds like the White House press room is like state-run media, basically, because they're going to present us with alternative facts. So you have to know where to go to get the other facts, I guess.
As for Sean Spicer himself, as we were beginning the recording of this podcast, he tweeted out a string of letters and numbers that could have been a password, could have also just been butt tweeting.
Yeah, I'm going to go with butt tweeting because it's not the first time he's done that in the last couple of days. He did it like yesterday, too.
By the time we record our next podcast a week from now, we should know the answer.
I hope so.
But yes.
Somebody, clearly it was a password of some kind. And, oh, you know what we did not talk, we don't have time to talk about this now. We're going to move on.
What is it? Give us a tease.
I wanted to talk about the private email service.
Oh, my God.
That would have been relevant.
It would have been. I
Yeah.
was so focused on the science gag orders and stuff that I forgot about that.
You got excited, I know.
I did. I will say this before we go. It's very early in the stages of planning a scientist march on DC now.
Yes.
As a follow-up, we will be bringing you more information about that as we learn it. It's going to be sort of interesting to see what the turnout for that is like. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be anywhere near the size of the Women's March, but hopefully solid, strong turnout for guys in, white lab coats.
And I hope that their signs are as clever as the ones at the women's marches. They have a big bar to clear there, high bar.
I'm going to go with probably not. There's going to be a lot of bad science puns, and we
Yeah.
all know how much you hate puns.
I hate puns, except when
I think
not.
we need to send a reporter down there and just get all the signs.
I think so too.
Yeah.
That's what Twitter's for, I suppose.
Yep.
All right.
Dana, any last thoughts before we call this?
No, I've still got a walloper of a sneeze up there, so I'd rather not do it into the mic.
You can
if
get off
possible.
the air before
Yeah.
you actually get that sneeze
Yeah.
out. I'm going to see if I can drag this out long enough so that you actually
Oh,
do it on
no.
the air.
Listeners at home, you really don't want to hear my sneeze.
I think they might.
No.
Where can the people find you on the internet?
I am Dana Wollman with no space.
Nate, any final thoughts?
I will say that I went to one of the women's marches this weekend, and it was the lone bright point in a week of hard news. And so support to all the people who made that happen, all the organizers. And there's going to be more coming, so that should be good times.
And where can people find you?
I'm on the Twitters at Nate Ingram, no space.
I am at Terrence O'Brien, lots of E's, no A's. Please hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you think, what you want to hear on the show.
Stay out of my mentions, please.
Slide into DMs, whatever you
No.
got to do.
You can hit me up on Twitter. Leave poor Dana alone. Let me know what you think of the show, what you want to hear, what you want to see, all of that stuff. You can also get us podcast@engadget.com or just hit us at Engadget Podcast on Twitter. If you have questions, comments, anything like that, we want to hear it. Make sure to subscribe in your podcast app of choice. Rate us on iTunes, all of that stuff. That helps more people find the show. And obviously, we want people to listen to the show as much as I said. Maybe you should tune out at the beginning of it. That's clearly bad advice. We do not have a comment of the week for you this week because...
You're all grounded.
We would have chosen Aaron on our staff.
Honestly, the best comment we had of the week came from our own employee, and that just felt like cheating. So, thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.
Later.